Well, hello, Eliza. I'm Jennifer Lahl. For those who don't know me, I'm the president of an organization out here in California, the Center for Bioethics and Culture, and we do our share of causing trouble out here. But I asked Eliza Mondegreen to speak with me today. I can't remember how long I've been following you on Twitter. And I think it was Twitter, which is how I came to know about you and your work and your writing. And I'm always impressed with young women who are smart and writing and good thinkers. So thank you for taking time to talk to me today.
I'm really excited to talk to you too. I've been so interested to see your work coming out and the connections that you draw between all of these issues that affect women. So yeah.
And I think, one of the things that I most want to talk with you about is I just want to know, what are you studying? What kind of grabbed your attention? Why have you how did you get into the space? And then we'll kind of go from there, because I just want to learn about you. What makes you tick?
Sure. So I definitely started out being very interested in women's reproductive health and women's reproductive rights, and I still am, but that was the first place where I really saw the gender stuff starting to intrude, and this was 9 years ago. And it just something did not seem quite right about it, and this is something that I talked about on another podcast not that long ago, but the organization that I was volunteering with, we were in our conference room arguing about language, whether it was inclusionary or exclusionary, and right up the hill, the state legislature was passing bills that were restricting abortion and requiring waiting periods and all kinds of barriers being put in the path of women. It was just we have to, if they know who they're legislating, whose bodies they're legislating, we have to know who's affected by this, and we have to be able to say it. But it was several years after that before I really looked into it. And I had friends who transitioned, and I think that was really an impetus for me, because there are a lot of things that if you are just an ally or a supportive person in the life of someone who's undergoing transition, there are a lot of things that you need to be able to passively accept. And you're encouraged to passively accept a lot of things without understanding them. You're told that you probably can't understand them. It doesn't matter if you understand them, you just need to support the person in your life.
Can you give an example of a couple of things that you were
I remember having conversations with a friend of mine, and it was I remember saying I can accept that it's really meaningful to you, that there's some sense in which, even though you're female, you can feel like a man, but that just doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't have any substance for me. And this is the kind of comment that you're not really supposed to make.
Not out loud, at least, right?
Right. And it's, you're supposed to accept that there's this experience that you don't understand, and you're probably not capable of understanding it. This is basically the entire plot of Julia Serrano's Whipping Girl, which I had the misfortune to reread recently. I don't know if you've read this book.
A long time ago.
What do you remember about it?
Ooh, don't put me on the spot. That would have been a question I would have liked to have known in advance so I could refresh my memory.
Okay. Well, we could also come back to it. It's well, I just reread it, and my sense
was that by your own choice, or because I know you're also a graduate student, was that a required read, or?
I chose to reread it.
Okay.
Because I wanted to understand how that book worked, and I had read it first in 2016 when I was pretty new to the subject, and I was I don't understand the mythology around this book and why it's the book that everybody is supposed to read, and then they'll totally understand, why trans women are our sisters and why it's so important to center them in feminism. And rereading it, the way the book works is that it just makes you, it manipulates you and says, if you're a good feminist, you understand why it's important. And if you don't understand, it's just you have this like cisgender privilege. And every time you say that you don't understand or ask questions about why it's necessary, you're just showing off that privilege. So that it really is just like this boot camp in like self-doubt and stay quiet. And if you're a good little intersectional feminist, you'll support this. And there aren't actual arguments. And this was something that I ran into really for the first time when friends of mine started to transition around that time.
And that would be, you said 2016?
Yeah, 2015, 2016.
Were you already, so you were obviously already done with university. Were you out working in the workforce? And this was when it was coming up just with friends? And...
yeah, we were all several years out of university at the time that this was happening.
Yeah. And when you were, if you don't mind me asking, what did you study undergraduate?
I was a history major. I studied 20th century totalitarian regimes.
Okay. So you weren't in the thick of gender studies and women's studies issues as a history major.
Well, I really wasn't. Like, I had really not been exposed to those kinds of things. But I had been exposed to a lot of stuff about like, how can language be manipulated? Yeah. Which I consider an inoculation of sorts.
And you live and study in the US context?
I did my undergraduate at a big public university in the US, and I'm doing my graduate degree in Canada.
Okay.
But very similar climates on campus.
You're not Canadian though, are you?
No, I'm American.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a Canadian in my family, so I just wondered if you were Canadian.
No.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird how when you don't play by the rules and you're not something that you thought you were, or you are labeled as a bad X, a bad woman, a bad feminist, a bad and I can't understand the rules because the rules, one, are always changing, and depending on who you talk to, they have different rules.
Yeah. And the design is that the rules will always change. So you never know what you can say. You never have any ground to stand on so that you can like think about it critically and ask questions. Like that's not an accident. That is designed to make it hard to question something that does not stand up very well to questioning.
And who's the designer? I mean, who gets to be the king or the queen that gets to pick and choose what the rules are? I mean, I like to get to the root of things, like how did this all come, and because I just turned in a book manuscript, and I'm pretty sure I asked your permission to quote something that you had written, and you gave me permission. I think I did, but it was getting into the roots of like Nazi Germany and the Holocaust and those kind of things. Where if you look at this modern day trans ideology, if you had to trace it back in an imperfect way, I won't hold you to this so that people can come after you and say you're wrong. Where were some of the the key kind of moments that the shift or the cracks happened?
I mean, I think something that I've been thinking about a lot, and of course it comes up with the work that you do around surrogacy and gender, and then it also comes up around prostitution, or as we're supposed to call it, sex work and pornography and all of these other issues that I see having a lot of interconnections. Like, I think this idea of autonomy as kind of the highest value is like, I don't know where we would be if the value of autonomy had not ascended to the place that it has in our culture. And that has come along with a stripping away of like any standard by which we might say like, this is good or bad for human flourishing. It's like when you don't have a standard to say this is good, this is bad, you can only say like, do we have more or less of it? So do we have more autonomy? Do we have less autonomy? And that seems to me to be just a really common thread, and this kind of like perilous non-judgmentalism, and the individual being the only measure of what we do and whether it's okay.
Yeah. it's kind of like a radical autonomy. And to me, a lot of it just gets to the root of the role of medicine,
Yeah.
the role of science, technology, medicine. Part of it is a good anthropological view of what is the body.
Yeah.
What is the body for? Is it, and it is sort of a perversion of autonomy. It's my body that I can do whatever I want. If I want to chop it off, if I want to sell it, if I want to turn it into a machine, and that kind of those convergence of those kind of ideas. And we don't have shared values, shared language.
Yeah.
Not to say that, the olden days was perfect.
Oh gosh. No, but I think we've lost.
And that's why you see
Yeah.
so many women working in the space of pornography, prostitution, reproductive exploitation, the trans movement, because we
Yeah.
understand the beauty and the amazing female body and how it works. and
Yeah.
how it's so desirable to the world. The world always wants,
Yeah.
body, even if it's a man who thinks he wants a female body and can steal luggage with female clothing in it.
Yeah. Oh boy, it's been an interesting week.
So what are you studying in graduate school to solve all these big questions or answer all these, not even solve them, but just sort of add an answer to?
So what I study is online trans and detrans communities, and trying to understand how involvement in these communities shape the attitudes and knowledge and beliefs that young people develop about sex and gender, and their intentions and expectations for transition or detransition. So I was really curious to look at, since obviously these communities are enormous and sprawling and you can only look at so much, I was like, okay, I want to find proxies that people use to talk about questions and doubts and to seek reassurance and certainty. So I was really looking at concepts, a lot of the ways that these are. The interesting thing about online trans communities is it's they're places where you go to put away your questions and your doubts about trans identity and whether transition is right for you and whether you really become a man or a woman. And so questioning your own gender identity is a manifestation of internalized transphobia. Questioning somebody else's gender identity is just right out. But these topics come up all the time because these experiences come up all the time. And so they will talk about it as, internalized transphobia. They'll talk about imposter syndrome or feeling like an imposter. They'll talk about are you really trans enough was one of my search terms to pull online content. And I thought that the most interesting term would be internalized transphobia, because it is such a convenient way to kind of shut down questions and doubts. The argument is that if you're doubting your trans identity, if you're questioning transition and whether it's right for you, that you have this, it's this false consciousness or this, I'm trying to think, all of the big 20th century ideologies have their version of this, where it's your bourgeois mindset that you have to put down, get rid of. But the term that actually ended up being the most interesting was the imposter syndrome term and all the conversations around being an imposter. And I think that that's because the feeling like an imposter, you see it, people talking about it, feeling like an imposter, presenting as their sex before they transition. They talk about feeling like an imposter as a trans person. So asking am I really trans or am I faking it? They feel like an imposter during transition as the man or a woman that they're trying to transition into being. And then after detransition, they often feel like an imposter in their sex again. And so you see it at all phases of before, during, after that it is one of those, it seems to be an experience that, like, I don't know if I can say this from a causality perspective, but it seems to be an experience that's related to making someone very susceptible to transition and what it promises, which is like, you won't feel like this anymore. Or to give substance to the feeling of being an imposter, where you kind of like, like if you already felt that way and then you do something that makes it more, not consciously, but you do something that makes it more substantiated.
Yeah.
Like
So,
when you feel like an outcast and then you do things that will make people outcast you so that like you're the reason.
so
You know
this
what I
is
mean?
this is interesting because I mean, of course, I've heard of imposter syndrome in other
Yeah.
settings, but I've never heard it in the context of trans. So that is a really interesting angle or a notion. I mean, is this going to be
Yeah.
culminate in some kind of a grand research project, or is this like, are you on a PhD track and this will be your dissertation?
So my program, you have to do the master's before you can apply to the PhD. So this is just a thesis. But I'm sure that I'll write it up other places too.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And what's the academic environment where you're studying? I mean, do you have to be kind of, under the radar, or is it hostile, or is it open to free exchange of ideas?
Yeah. I would say it's a mix. I haven't had the experience that I expected that I would have, which is that I kind of thought that I would like have no friends and everybody would hate me. Or that I would have to make the decision to kind of like keep pretty quiet about what I was working on. And what I've actually found to be the case is that I've been really open about what I'm working on and people are really curious, and I've had a little bit of pushback, but most of it, like I think one of the reasons that it's gone so well is well, for one thing, I'm in a program where a lot of people have previous clinical experience. I don't. I'm
Yeah.
from like the nonprofit sector, but people who have previous clinical experience, like they know these patients. They know that there's more going on here, that it's
When you
not
say
just an
clinical, is it a medical background or a
like a psychiatric.
yeah, counseling kind of, okay.
Yeah.
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 So they have
So
intellectual.
they have some background and they're interested to talk about it because it lets them put the pieces that they've observed in a clinical setting together, where they're like, yeah, I did notice that a lot of my patients with gender dysphoria were autistic, or
Mhm,
that a
mhm.
lot of them were, girls hitting adolescence and having these revelations about their identities. And I think the other thing is that if you do not use the, I think that some people who have kind of perspectives like mine, when they talk to people who they suspect might disagree with them, they try to be very conciliatory in the language that they use. So they'll use the language that, trans activists use and try kind of question it within that framework. And that really doesn't work. Like if I accepted that framework when I was talking to people, I would have to like, give myself a gender identity and then basically like discount anything that I said before I opened my mouth. Because I'd be like, yo, like I'm a, white cisgender heterosexual woman and I have a lot of thoughts about trans stuff. And it's like, but if you don't use any of the language and you just use clear sex-based, reality-based language, a lot of the people who might be inclined to disagree with you won't notice that you're being heretical. And a lot of the people who haven't thought about it very much will just be able to see what you mean.
Yeah.
And
Well, part of that's
yeah,
because these are new rules, and people, when you just speak
yeah,
in the factual way, it's our first language.
yeah,
Say he and she, and not they, them, these are, so
yeah. And it does like
good
it's
for
like this,
you.
it's kind of like language is really contagious, like language use. So if other people are kind of restricting and policing the way that you talk, you're going to start policing and restricting yourself. And if you talk with other people in a way that's really like clear and you say what you mean and you don't, observe all these new taboos that have gathered around sex and gender, you free other people up to talk much more openly and to think about it much more openly. And I would have to say that it's really gone much better than I had any right to expect.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So how much longer are you going to be a student before you're finished? You-
Well, I think I'll be done with my program next summer.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
the end is just around the corner for you. And do you
Yeah.
have aspirations of continuing on for a PhD, or will you then go out and put all your learned knowledge and wisdom to work in the workforce, or where do you see
Yeah.
yourself landing?
So I would be interested to do a PhD. Part of it is that I just really like the, like it really is a dream to be able to do research and write all the time, even if you know, don't, it's not really making a living. But I don't see myself having like an academic career either after the master's or after a PhD. Like I was older than the average graduate student getting into this. Like I'm in my 30s. And like I think that if I could do anything after this, like I would love to do freelance writing or journalism around just mental health generally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know how lucrative it is, but there's certainly a lot of people out there that have their paid Substacks and their,
Yeah.
and I don't know how, I mean, I know, just, I can just be honest, people from our point of view and the work that we do, they want free stuff.
Yeah.
Of course, it costs us a lot of money to produce X,
Yeah.
but then they want, the public wants, free. But yeah, I mean, it is wonderful if you can find one that you love doing, you're passionate about, and it also
Yeah.
puts food on your table. That's kind of the dream job, right?
That's the dream.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. And you said before you had a background in nonprofit work?
Yeah, I worked for a state public health department, and then I worked in the public health nonprofit
Okay.
sector.
So you have that thing in common with me. I love public health. I was a nurse, and when I
Okay.
went to nursing school, I actually, my emphasis was on public health. So I have my public health certificate from the state of California on my desk here.
Yeah, I'm guessing.
Which
So
they didn't call
you're
me
in the
when
Bay Area, right?
I'm sorry, what?
You're in the Bay Area, right?
I am. Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's where I was when I was in the nonprofit.
Oh, okay. Too bad we didn't know each other
Yeah.
in that time. But yeah, I
Yeah.
kept wondering when the state was going to call me when they were managing the COVID pandemic for the state, pick my brain.
Yeah.
But yeah. So how did you get interested in the reproductive technology aspect of the work that I'm so passionate about? Or when did you start wondering, is it really a good idea for women to sell their eggs or have babies for other people for money?
Yeah. I think like the parallels kind of leapt out at, I was just curious. I just started reading about it because it was like, my knee-jerk reaction is that there's something wrong with this. And yet the people I generally like line up with politically are all on board. And so like, what's going on? Why is there that disconnect? And when I dug into it, it was like, okay, this is the same, I don't know, this is the same kind of thing. And I got really curious about like surrogacy and, what it is and what it does and how different that is from the way that we talk about it.
Yeah.
And kind of the legal structure that grew up around it, and the industry that has grown up around it, and how it pulls just unbelievable amounts of money, like out of the bodies of like poor women and children, and like out of the desires of like rich people for children. And then it just seemed like, I mean, it seems like the same thing to me. And I would be so curious, like having read Kaja Ekman. I'm sure that I'm not saying her name right, but
Kaisa, I know her.
Kaisa.
Yeah, we're having an email thread between us and a couple of other women about women being canceled and women losing jobs. And
please tell her that I love her work.
Oh.
I read her book about surrogacy and prostitution, and the whole time I was just taking notes in the margins where I was like, this is exactly the same thing. Like, this is exactly the same thing. Like, how many of these players behind the scenes are going to be just the same? Because the money is there, like for it to be successful, there has to be, or the extent to which surrogacy, prostitution, gender, all of these things will be successful is the extent to which you like successfully dehumanize other people and kind of like disembody yourself.
Yeah.
And and they're framed the same way, where you conceal whatever the conflict is and you make it this bigger story about liberation. And if you bring the details back in, that story falls apart. So the details can't come back in. It's
Yeah.
the same thing.
I interviewed her right after that book came out because I read it like
Okay.
you, and I was like, yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And I get busted all the time because I interact with a lot of surrogates online that are very pro surrogates, and they're kind of
Yeah.
like, they're the happy hookers that, you know, Kaisa talks about.
Yeah.
You know, they're the ones when they age out of surrogacy, like the prostitute becomes the madame and running the brothel.
Yeah.
You know, the surrogates work for the agency to recruit and find other surrogates. And they're like, what, you're calling us prostitutes? I'm like, no, I'm not calling you.
No.
I'm just drawing the parallels between the
Yeah.
market industry use of your bodies. And
Yeah.
Kaisa does such a great job in that book. I still to this day recommend that book. And it's probably
Yeah.
got to be, what, I don't know, maybe close to 10 years old now that it came out, but it's still
Yeah.
relevant. And I think so many people don't make the connections and they don't have a really good, strong view of the human body and the purpose of, and the beauty of, and the need to protect the body. And,
Yeah.
you know, we're in California where everybody's so health conscious and they don't want hormones in their water and their food, and they don't smoke and they exercise and they're not fat and all those good
Yeah.
things, you know, that are important. But then they sort of change their mind and go, oh, but this is okay to do over here to children or to women because we need something from them. And
Right.
it's
Yeah. And just having these like impossible, I don't know, that they're just having these impossible desires of, you know, you change sex or you have this child that somebody else carries and gives birth to, but that the actual mother will have no like legal or emotional connection. Like there's a lot that I've learned from following you about surrogacy. Like I think you had posted something which was just I think it was a photo that a woman had posted on Instagram who was a surrogate that was like all of the injections that she had to do,
yeah.
like just to time her cycle with the egg donor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
The surrogacy, all the needles.
yeah, and I learned from you like how much more dangerous it is when you have it's gestational surrogacy where it's an egg donor, right?
Right. Yes. Which
Yeah.
is sort of overwhelmingly the huge part of the practice today. We don't have the
Yeah.
old traditional surrogate, like the famous Mary Beth Whitehead baby M case,
Yeah.
80s, I think it was the 80s, you know, which was Mary Beth's biological child that she sold for $10,000.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've kind of moved away from that. And part of that's intentional because we, especially in the case of same-sex male couples, we don't want either one of the women to get any funny, you know, ideas about
Yeah.
it's my baby. So, and, you know, we've gone so far in many states, especially California, where the surrogate in California, she waives all maternal rights before she's even pregnant.
Mm.
So her name never even appears on the birth certificate, so that they don't even have to go through a legal adoption to remove the name and, you know, put whoever the intended parents.
I didn't realize that was the status there.
But that's all, you know, it's just the control, right? It's the control.
Yeah.
Contract, it's the money, it's the control, you know, that this is not your baby. So anyway.
Yeah.
So other than Kaisa, who are either current or past, like who are the big people that you gravitate to for their, you know, either you love their books or their writings influenced you, or who do you follow like on Twitter because you're going to learn something new and important every day? Or
Yeah. So I really like have all the respect in the world for Helen Joyce and what she does, and
Helen Joyce.
yeah, and
Yeah.
just what an amazing person she is to just be able to go out and talk to anybody and answer any question and think out loud. And so she is like, she definitely comes to mind. And I wish I were sitting over by my bookshelf.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I mean, I think so much of my background, I did my feminist reading pretty late in life. Like I was mostly into my 20s before I did that. And so what probably had a greater impact on me in terms of my interest in the way that I write about stuff is like George Orwell.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you have an Orwell quote on your Twitter bio,
I
don't you?
do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you an Aldous Huxley fan too, as well? Were you reading
Yes,
Brave New
but
World as well as Animal Farm?
yeah, but nobody like Orwell.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've read Kate Millay, I've read Simone de Beauvoir, I was reading, I haven't finished it, but Shulamith Firestone this summer, and was thinking about that before we were going to talk, because it was like my sense is she really thinks like the only way that men and women can ever be equal in a meaningful sense is if like we stop being human.
Yeah.
And it's like, boy, that's a pretty bleak, who wants to stop being human? And the answer is like apparently a lot of people. But I don't want to stop being human.
And
Um,
is your perfect day curled up with a nice good book to read, or are you more like get me outside and take a nice hike, or what
I
does
have
Eliza
really,
do just to relax?
yeah. Um, Probably to go out for a walk and either listen to a podcast, or I have this habit that I'm sure makes me look like a total crazy person of like wearing my headphones and just leaving myself really long voice memos while I'm walking. Like it's when I do most of my writing.
Uh-huh.
And it's great because people don't talk to you. Like,
Are you an introvert?
oh yeah.
Yeah,
Are
me.
you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Incredible. I mean, I get on the plane and the first thing is I put my earbuds in my ear, like, don't talk to me. I
Yeah.
got things to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about like you got into being a documentarian. Was that a way of like coming out of kind of your shell and how to relate to people and how to relate to the world?
I think I often tell people that, well, one is the realization that people don't read. I mean, you're a writer, trying to get people to read is really difficult. You
Yeah.
open up your web browser and it will say, read time 3 minutes, like begging you, please, it won't take much time, just read this.
Those are so sad.
And I like to write, and, writing is work for me. It's hard. It doesn't come easy. But, I had friends early on that encouraged me to make films because people will watch videos. This is why
Yeah.
we're having our conversation and videotaping it, because people will probably listen to it while they're taking a walk or watch it while
Yeah.
they're, working, versus if we wrote out our interview, less people would read it because they have to
Yeah.
read. And I do think the power of visual medium is very, very instructive. And you can, this is an example, like my first real film that I just did all 100% on my own was Exploitation.
Mhm.
And, we would, that was back in the day when theater screenings were very robust. And so we did a lot of theater screenings, and we did a lot of screenings at law schools. And we would always survey the audience before we showed the film, and we just asked them 5 short little questions that were either yes or no. And then we'd show the film, and then we'd ask them the same questions again. And we had like 97, 98% conversion to our point of view, because we just showed, it was this information lacking. Most people think, oh, prostitution, well, if a woman chooses it and wants to do that, well, she should be able to do it. But when you actually start getting in under the hood and kicking the tires, people go, ooh, I did not know all this kind of shady, same with surrogacy. You can change people's minds when they watch and hear these surrogates who had these horrible, awful things done to them. And most people just read the little ads on everybody's happy and there's this cute little baby. So, and I think that would be powerful in the trans movement too.
Yeah.
Because there's quite a few more films that I think are still coming. And, I've made 2 films now in the trans space, and we haven't gotten kicked off of YouTube or shut down, and we have gotten really pretty minimal hate.
Okay.
Really.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, part of it I think is, well, one, I think it's our style of filmmaking. It's not bombastic. It's calm and measured and reasonable. So I think just the approach that you have with people, similar to what you've talking about. I just talk in reality terms, and people just kind of go with it. They don't get all, you're misgendering and you're right. And part of it I think is too, many more people are waking up to it and realizing it's not just about this is what these people feel and this is the solution for them. So,
right, that it's a very funny version of authenticity, and that maybe it's not just an individual who's affected.
And I think some of that comes just from the collective work that everybody's doing. And, so I can't take credit for it. But there's so many people out there, the Helen Joyces, the Colin Wrights, the D-trans outspoken people, you know, that are all raising awareness and getting people to stop and think about. And also the data, you know, when you have data that supports, I mean, Melissa Farley, I don't know if you know Melissa Farley, but she's a good colleague of mine out here. And she spent her whole entire life doing research around prostitution. And
yeah, I have talked to her. She's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. She did great research that showed once prostitution was legalized in Germany, everything that Germany was sold, that if we legalize it, all these things will go away. In fact, it just escalated, you know.
Yeah.
Done research where she actually, you know, interviewed men who buy sex, you know, to kind of get into the hat. So, you know, there's just a lot of brave people out there doing really important data kind of work that we need to, you know, because
but it's just,
we can't just I was just watching a debate, I haven't finished it, between shapeshifter and cat
okay.
Against two trans people. And, you know, I'm not all the way through it, but, you know, it's, you can see they're playing the data. Well, this study says it's fine. And this study says it's not fine. And this study says the suicide rate is, no, this study says it's not. So we have to be careful about the data as our only tool, but yeah.
But no, but it's like, if you have, you have to be able to tell a human story, and you have to be able to, I mean, it's like Keza says, like, you have to take apart the liberatory story and be like, what's liberatory about like specific situations, like get rid of the gloss, actually look at what's happening. And you just in the last couple of minutes, you've reminded me of a bunch of women whose work I have found so valuable, like Melissa, like Ellie Arrow. Do you follow her on Twitter?
I do. We actually talk quite a bit and just messaging, because her space is mostly prostitution.
Mostly
But
prostitution.
she's gotten into the surrogacy issue too.
So. Yeah. And that like anonymous website where they print kind of punters, sex buyers reviews of women on like The Mask. Even just something like that is just so absolutely chilling. And it's like, it's just not possible to believe the things that you're supposed to believe when you say sex work is work, when you read the way that the men who buy sex think about the women.
Yeah.
It's just not.
I remember we hosted an event, our organization hosted an event several years back in New York around the Commission on the Status of Women at the UN. And it was, you know, there's tons of my people, my friends that come from all around the world. And so we had our event, and then we shared because we had already paid for the meeting room, and we had 4 hours and our event was 2 hours long. So we shared our meeting room with Rachel Morin. Do you know Rachel Morin?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So so Rachel was sitting in the audience, you know, for our event, which we were talking about surrogacy. And I remember this very salty comment that, you know, that's typical of Rachel, where she says something about, you know, why do women have to put men's genitals in their mouth just in order to put food on their table? Why can't we give women food? You know, but, you know,
she really has a gift for cutting everybody short.
Comments. Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great.
I really wanted to ask you.
Sure.
Like, you moved from being curious and being concerned about like egg donation and surrogacy and stuff into the trans stuff. Like, what was it that?
Two things.
To go that way.
Two very clear things. One was my background was always in pediatric nursing.
Okay.
So I was always interested in maternal child health, which makes sense with surrogacy and separating moms and babies. And just, you know, I saw in the hospital, you know, back in the olden days, because I'm much older than you know, how we had more of the watchful waiting approach for kids. And, you know, we would see kids in the hospital that had to be admitted to the hospital because they were so anorexic, they were literally starving themselves to death. And we would never say, oh yeah, you are fat, you know, that whole thing. And then the second thing was when we found out that young people are offered fertility preservation as part of their management of their trans journey, you know, freezing and banking their sperm and eggs when they're, you know, 15 and 16. And what I know about reproductive medicine is that means that they're going to need to, you know, become a patient doubly for life if they want to go on, and the, you know, and trans women will have to have surrogates unless they are partnered with somebody who has a uterus, and they might need eggs or sperm depending on which ones were banked or frozen. So that's when we just said, well, they've come into our space.
That's interesting, because like when you look at it from the outside, there is this kind of like perfect what's the word for it? It's like where doveleafing or
perfect storm.
No, it's like when something fits together perfectly and it's like, oh, it was kind of made that way.
Synergy. I don't know. I think
I
so.
don't know. It's not coming to mind, but it's like, yeah, you have all of these, like, the whole,
The stars aligned.
yeah, it's like you have this whole empire built on disembodiment and all of the pieces interlock. That's the word. That all the pieces interlock. And it's like, okay, maybe you transition and, well, if you lose your fertility, like, you can hire a surrogate. And well, if you shrink your dating pool, you can hire a sex worker, you can watch porn.
Yeah.
And there's always, if you're not satisfied, like, there's always another surgery that you can pursue. And if you're harmed, like, it's, you know, it's really like, it's ableist to complain. And like, do you think that like a life where you're sick or you're injured because of these surgeries is like less worth living? And there's like no way to criticize it if you kind of buy into this overall
Yeah.
way of being human.
And to me, it's like we're always trying to rip apart the body,
Yeah.
and that's sort of the transhumanist, you know, and then refashion it
Yeah.
and put it back together, you know, Humpty Dumpty. That's all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put a little
Yeah.
Humpty. So we do all these really bad, harmful things, and then we go, oh, but no, that's all right, because this doctor or this technology or this can, you know, fix
Yeah.
it.
Or if it's a problem, like, medical technology is going there and it'll fix it, like, in the
Yeah.
future. And it's like, this is maybe just a human problem. And it's a dangerous time to lose the ability to say, like, okay, of course it's better to accept your body than to reject it. And of course it's better to like be able to bear your own child than to like exploit another woman's body across the world. And it's better to be loved rather than like to have transactional sexual relationships, like,
Yeah.
but you're not supposed to say those things because they're stigmatizing.
Yeah. And we are averse of suffering, right? So we
Yeah.
want to use technology and medicine in any way to avoid, almost to the extreme, that we're not allowed to suffer anymore or have any kind of discomfort. Everything needs to be medicalized or fixed, or you know, then your life is over or something. I don't know. I mean, then you have these, well, then you're
Yeah.
gonna have a dead child if you don't allow X, Y, and Z to happen. So
Yeah.
yeah, interesting. Well, we could talk all day, but I'm going to let you go.
Okay.
I'll have you stay on after I hit the stop
Sure.
recording, so
That
we
would
can
be
say a proper goodbye.
okay.
But I'm always here. I'm just a Zoom chat away. Should you ever want to reach out or connect with
Yeah, I
me,
would love
know,
to.
yeah, I'm a huge fan and I'm a huge admirer, and I just always love when I see young girls that are coming up to fill the shoes of us older women that are, you know, gonna peace out sooner than later. So.
Well, we still need you, so
I'm not
stick
gonna be
around.
anywhere too soon, but you know, we always have to be bringing up the bench.
Yeah.
All
All right.
right.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.